On Thursday, March 18, 1937, at about 3:17 p.m., a school in New London, Texas, blew apart in a single thunderclap. The building folded in on itself, and at least 294 students and teachers would not come home. Most of the town heard it, then ran toward it. So how did an ordinary school day turn into the worst school disaster in American history? Shoes scuffed across hallway floors, pencils scratched on paper, and teachers watched the clock with their students. A parent-teacher association meeting was underway in the gym, a separate building nearby. Elementary children were already released at 3 p.m., and the high school students were waiting for the 3:30 bell. A few students complained of headaches, the kind of thing that can happen in a crowded school. No one smelled smoke, no one saw flames. What nobody could see was what was gathering below their feet. Under much of the school was a crawl space, a low, dark area that ran beneath the floors. It had limited ventilation, just a few openings to the outside. In a space like that, fresh air does not move quickly. If something leaks into it, it can sit and spread, unnoticed. At 3:17 p.m., in the basement wood shop, a teacher switched on an electric sander. The machine had a reputation, and students called it Old Sparky. It was not the loud motor that changed history. It was the tiny spark that can jump when an electrical switch closes. In that instant, the spark met a space that had quietly become dangerous. For hours, natural gas had been leaking into the crawl space and lower areas of the building. Gas and air mixed together until it reached the right proportion to ignite. When the spark hit, the crawl space acted like a sealed box. With nowhere to escape, the pressure of the blast pushed up hard, lifting floors and buckling walls before the roof crashed down. People outside described the school swelling upward, then collapsing in a roar of debris and dust. The sound carried for miles. In the first moments, survivors stumbled out in shock, not knowing what had happened. Parents in the gym ran toward the main building and were met by rubble where classrooms had been. Rescue was difficult for one simple reason: the building did not just break, it compressed. Concrete, steel, desks, and roof sections lay piled on top of the spaces where children had been sitting minutes before. There was no fire to guide the eye, only dust, broken walls, and silence. Many rescuers had to work by feel, reaching into gaps and listening for faint voices. New London had no hospital of its own, and nearby facilities were quickly overwhelmed. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers poured in from surrounding towns. Oil field workers arrived with lights and equipment, turning night into a harsh daylight so they could keep searching. The entire community worked, sometimes with bare hands, because time felt like the only thing that mattered. As the hours passed, the work changed from rescue to recovery. Families waited for names, then for confirmation, then for something they could bury. Confusion and grief made even simple tasks painful. The town held funeral after funeral, and the loss settled in like a weight that did not lift when the noise stopped. Now the question is why a school would have so much gas running through it in the first place. The answer begins with oil. In 1930, the East Texas oil boom turned this rural area into a place of jobs, money, and new families. New London's school district became wealthy, and in 1932, a large modern school was built as a point of pride. But even in a boom town, budgets were watched closely. The school used gas for heat, and the monthly bill was a constant target for savings. Nearby, oil operations produced residue gas, a byproduct that companies often burned off, because it was hard to transport and not worth much. Tapping into those lines for free gas was common in the area, and it was treated like a normal shortcut. That free gas had two deadly traits. It was colorless, and it was largely odorless, especially compared to what we expect today. A leak might cause headaches, but not an obvious warning. And in a town where petroleum smells were already part of the air, faint odors were easy to ignore even if someone noticed them. There were warning signs that only make sense in hindsight. Headaches had been reported, and people searched for causes like sewer gases or stale air. A janitor even went into the crawl space earlier that day and used a match to see, a moment that shows how little anyone feared gas down there. If the leak was smaller then, or the mixture was not yet right, disaster would have waited until later. By late afternoon, the recipe was complete. A large crawl space with limited ventilation, gave gas a place to collect. Dozens of connections and pipes offered many chances for a joint to loosen or a fitting to fail. A full building meant maximum victims, and a single electric switch provided the spark that turned invisible fuel into a crushing blast. Afterward, investigators struggled because the explosion destroyed the very evidence they needed. Anger rose in the community, and many people wanted a clear name to blame. In the end, few were held responsible in a courtroom, and that left families feeling like the truth had no place to land. But the disaster did force one change that spread far beyond New London. Texas moved quickly to require that gas be mixed with a strong-smelling odorant so leaks could be detected before they reached an explosive level. That is why, decades later, when you smell gas in a home or a store, you are smelling a warning that was not available to those children in 1937. New London rebuilt, but the memory stayed close to the ground. The town carried stories of oil-field lights in the night, of neighbors digging side by side, and of a school day that ended before the bell. Today, the tragedy is remembered not only for what it took, but for what it taught about invisible risks we can no longer afford to ignore. If you had lived there in 1937, do you think you would have challenged the free gas practice, or would it have felt like an ordinary part of life?